Thank you, everyone who is joining us. We're getting a bunch of people just coming online, but we are going to go ahead and get started right here at the top of the hour. My name is Nicole Ursig. I am the Director of Marketing for Agriculture Future of America. We are so glad all of you are here to celebrate Pride with us. We have a wonderful panel for you today. Thank you to everyone for joining us and to Ryan Goodman, who is going to lead this conversation for us. I'm going to turn things over to him and let him introduce himself and the panelists and get us started with a little bit of an icebreaker. Everyone, you are welcome to use the chat. Put your questions, your comments there, as well as if you want to, when they open it up to any questions, you can also turn your mic on and chat with our panelists. But Ryan, I will let you kick things off.
All right. Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. Happy Pride Month and happy Wednesday. Glad that you are all joining us for this conversation today. So definitely encourage you to join the chat, to participate and jump in. I've asked an icebreaker question. I would love to know kind of who you are, where you're from, and what you've been up to this summer. So if you'll use that option, and then we'll use that chat throughout the meeting. If you've got any questions that come up, if there's anything that you'd like to follow up, you can feel free to drop that in. This is a conversation on pride and LGBTQ plus people, the challenges that we face and allyship that's in our industry. So we definitely want to answer any questions and be respectful of the opinions and thoughts that are shared here today. To kick us off, I'll introduce myself and then I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves and share how they are involved in agriculture today. So I'm Ryan Goodman. I'm the founder of Pride in Agriculture. I've been involved in the agriculture space my entire life, and specifically advocacy through Beef Runner is my platform where you can find me on social media. And Pride in Agriculture came about a couple of years ago as I saw a need to provide a space and create a space where we could have conversations with farmers and ranchers and grassroots level of the agriculture community to talk about these topics and to bring forward examples of how LGBTQ plus people are leaders in our community, leaders in our industry, and how we can foster, an environment where we can have more inclusive spaces across agriculture in our rural communities. So it's kind of been a platform to be able to create that space for those conversations and bring those stories forward so we can elevate the leaders in our industry. So we've got a few of those folks on our call today as panelists, asking them to share some of their perspectives. And if Michael, if you will, kick us off and kind of introduce yourself and how you're involved in the industry today.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And thank you all so much for taking the time to join us. Like Ryan said, happy Pride. My name is Michael Granche. I serve as the manager of animal ag and exports for the National Corn Growers Association. So grew up on my family's small beef and pork operation in Northern Virginia. Took a couple different internship opportunities on Washington as policy and communications support staff. Made a pretty dramatic left turn and became the winemaker's apprentice at the top vineyard in Virginia. And then when the opportunity came available to go head to St. Louis for the corn growers, I knew it was my time to go. So packed up the truck and off I went. And I'll pause there.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. And great to meet you. And thank you for being here. Melissa, what about you?
Hi, I'm Melissa Augusto, and I grew up on a dairy in Central California. And currently, I'm a board member of the Cultivating Change Foundation. And then my career is at Dairy Management Inc., the dairy checkoff, where I work in communications as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate it. And Caitlin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin Davis. I'm here from Greenville, South Carolina. I'm an AFA ambassador for my school, Fort Valley State University. So I'm here today representing AFA and representing my school as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. And thank you for representing AFA as a voice here on this conversation as well. So to get us started and kind of have a roundabout and hear a little bit more of each of your perspectives, I've got a question for each of you. Michael, to kick us off. You mentioned, in your kind of work in sustainability in the space, diversity plays an important role in that social or people pillar as we have that. Could you elaborate a little bit more how social diversity, including LGBTQ plus inclusion, helps contribute to broader sustainability in our food systems and agriculture today?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, of course, agriculture, we are very firmly committed and rooted to the broader aspects of sustainability. And so I think pretty commonly we kind of, as industry, define sustainability as a three-legged stool. So we need to be socially sustainable, we need to be economically sustainable, and we also need to be environmentally sustainable. And so I'll talk a little bit more about what it means to be socially sustainable. There's a lot of different avenues to social sustainability. It can look like a lot of different things depending on the scope of your operation. So perhaps it's rural healthcare, perhaps it's access to rural internet, perhaps it's worker safety, immigration. It can look like a lot of different things, but for the context of our conversation today and talking about, DEI and the LGBTQIA plus community, we as agriculturalists need to be very intentional about being very inclusive and being very welcoming. We need to be an industry where people want to work, an industry where people can see themselves having successful careers, successful platforms. And this is really important. And the reason for this is that very often the hands that produce our food look very different than the hands that consume our food. And as an industry, we have a very daunting task ahead of us, which is to feed an exponentially growing global population. And we're going to need all the help we can get. And that's going to take us to be a very attractive and competitive industry. And if people don't feel that their values are in alignment with how they perceive agriculture, we're just not going to be able to retain and recruit that talent. And that's going to become problematic for us.
Yeah, I think it's important. We need all hands on deck, right? As our industry continues to grow, as our communities, require more people to be a part of that. So from your experience, there are, metrics and statistics and examples of how LGBTQ plus people maybe are migrating from off the farm and moving to more urban, suburban areas, or getting involved in other ways in the industry that are not on farm or in rural communities. Can you speak to a little bit of that and maybe how those experiences are impacting our efforts there and the people that are involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'd be remiss not to mention my master's work with Virginia Tech was actually in social sustainability. And so my research project was to measure the perceived levels of diversity, equity, and inclusion from the perspective of gay male agriculturalists. And so this absolutely, like you said, statistically speaking, this is unfortunately a very sad reality. There are a lot of folks in rural America that feel ostracized from their home communities. And so to seek acceptance, to seek career growth, to seek opportunity, unfortunately, a lot of individuals do find themselves moving to more urban environments or coastal cities, thinking of, San Francisco, DC, Boston. There's a lot of different kind of coastal hubs that kind of have reputation for being perhaps a bit more accepting. And so through the interviews conducted while I was gathering data and undergoing this research project, there were several individuals that specifically told me that they had to leave, or there was an individual too who was the firstborn of his two other siblings, and typically would have been next in line to take over operation of their family's farm. And because he was an out and proud gay male, his parents denied him of being able to operate that farm. And so he chose to stay in rural America. And I think that's brave, and I certainly applaud that. But certainly we see people leaving. I think people want to feel whole and visible, and it's hard to stay somewhere where that doesn't feel economically viable for you.
Yeah, I think there are some examples of that is a current thing, but there are fortunately some examples of where we are making progress in some of those areas and building spaces where we're raising awareness of these conversations and having really important good conversations and kind of building that. So Michael, I'll come back to a little bit of your experiences here in a few minutes, but I want to jump to Melissa. being an ally in the industry, and some industry groups working with farmers and ranchers and in the industry. I think you've got some awesome and incredible, perspectives to share as part of that. So to kind of kick off a little bit, you're a board member with Cultivating Change Foundation and a founder of an ERG, Employee Resource Group at Dairy Management, Inc. So could you explain a little bit about what that looks like, and what are some effective ways that that you've seen allies supporting LGBTQ plus people in the agriculture industry?
Sure, thanks, Ryan. I will say that I always tell people that I feel like I was an ally before I knew what the word meant. I grew up in a family where I have several family members who are members of the community. And I think part of the conversation with Michael about people leaving home because they feel like they can't, live their true authentic life. I had an uncle who left home at 18. The moment he could leave, he did. And, as a child, not understanding, like, why isn't Uncle Gary at all the family events? Why isn't he here? And then hearing chatter across the family that maybe wasn't always the most friendly to who he is, became something that became truly important to me, to be a voice for those who aren't in the room, right? And I think that that's the critical part about being an ally, is that often we are in the room and people think they are in a safe place to make the comments that are unsavory and not supportive. And that's when we have to use our voices. And so that's been important to me my entire life. And it is what's led me not only to working in communications, but to being on the board of the Cultivating Change Foundation. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the foundation, our mission is valuing and elevating LGBTQ plus agriculturalists through advocacy, education, and community. And so we hold events, build community, and also have some collegiate chapters where we're bringing together folks so that they can see other people like them and pursue their careers in agriculture in that way. And we have kind of become the home and employee resource group for those who may not have that, right? And for those who are looking around their small communities or their small offices or otherwise that don't see people who are like them and working in agriculture, to be the home for that. So when I joined the dairy management staff a couple of years ago, I was having a conversation with HR about what employee resource groups existed, and we didn't yet have it, but we just launched in the last year and had our first event last 2 weeks ago, maybe, the Utterly Equal ERG. But for those who aren't familiar with employee resource groups, those are just really home for folks, again, to have a safe place to meet other people like them, and for allies to connect and understand how we can be supportive, right? And I think that that's again, being the voice in the room when folks otherwise need that representation, and finding a soft landing spot for folks.
Yeah, that really strikes the chord when you say kind of, as an ally, being a voice for the room, voice in the room for those who aren't present or aren't there. And I think that visibility, seeing someone step up, on our behalf can really be impactful a lot. So, could you describe a little bit more about that, and maybe why allyship is, critical and part of creating or fostering inclusivity in our industry?
Yeah, it's not only having the voice in the room, but also I think taking the opportunity to be able to tell these stories, right? And it's part of the work that you do, Ryan, is recognizing that people don't necessarily know who they're talking to, right? And everybody's connected to someone, whether they know it or not, and how impactful this is. And I think that not only is it being the voice in the room, but helping to elevate the voices of those who should be in the room. And I know that I take it very seriously to ensure that, if we're going to have this conversation, let's ensure that those voices are represented, not just through me, but through their own voices. And so I think that making sure that folks recognize how that impacts the work is really critical.
Yeah, in one key point there, I hear of a differentiation, and helping people navigate that is like, as an ally, not being expected to speak for other people, right? But maybe knowing when to pull other people in, right? Or raising the
Absolutely.
flag and saying, hey, I think there's another perspective that could be considered here.
Right. We're not, allies are not centered to the work, but we can be very important to getting the right people in the center of the work.
Awesome, thank you. So Caitlin, let's jump over to you. As a student, kind of young professional perspective here, definitely want to kind of hear a little bit from you as a student leader. How do you see visibility of LGBTQ plus people impacting your peers and future professionals in the industry?
Yeah, so I would say I think my generation is much more accepting of LGBTQ people, especially being in the space that I am right now, which is academia. I think there are a lot of resources available. I think there are a lot more people comfortable saying that like they are LGBT. So it gives you the chance to meet a lot more people and gain like a lot more perspectives versus how it would be like in past years where people were afraid to be who they are or afraid to even say that they are part of that community for fear of like ostracization or even for their life. So I would say that I think our generation is doing very good in that. Some ways that I think that we are increasing visibility is I honestly just think it's being your true self in whatever space that you're in. Like our past two like school presidents, I'm sorry, you're gonna hear my gardener in the back, but our past two school presidents have been openly a part of the LGBTQ community. I'm openly a part of the LGBTQ community as well as being chief justice for my school. So I'm in a position of power while also still being able to openly be myself. I think what Melissa was saying, being able to be a part of the conversation and when people think that they are in a safe space to say like those unsavory comments, I think especially to me, because I'm more like feminine presenting and like you probably like wouldn't know. So I think I definitely, my biggest tool is my voice and being able to say, no, that's not true, or clear up any miscommunications or misconstruements or anything of that nature. Let's see. So yeah, I just think that's kind of how our student leaders are impacting is by being ourselves and being able to be a voice for people that don't have a voice.
You know, in addition to kind of, saying something if you see something, do you see different ways that, maybe Gen Z or as college students stepping into young professional space today? What is different here and kind of what we may have seen in older generations of how we're creating inclusive spaces for everyone represents different aspects of diversity?
Mm-hmm. I would say the stigma around there's two things, like the stigma and as well as the language actually three things: the stigma, the language, and the culture surrounding being LGBT. I think has shifted a lot, like as far as I'd say in like other generations where it'd be more of a taboo subject or something that's not so accepted or looked down upon. I think it has shifted, and I think a lot of that has to do with, in my experience, has to do with like religion. So it's the views in my generation, I think, have changed because I think the views of religion have changed. So it's not so much as no, because of whatever views you are. I think it's become like people are more accepting of it as you read more into whatever religion that you're in. I think people are becoming more accepting in that space. I think the culture is shifting because the language has shifted. So the different nuances behind being LGBTQ have been more explored, and I want to say the resources behind that and the things that you can read up about that and about like the state of the LGBT community has shifted dramatically too due to technology and how close information is to you now. Like it's literally at your fingertips. And so I think that has also helped people being able to actually be educated from reliable sources about being LGBT or about the community. I think that has helped a lot as well. As far as technology. And I want to revisit the language because there has been like a huge shift in just the way that LGBT is handled. And I do think it's a lot because of like the language has shifted surrounding LGBT. Like it's not as as negative, like bearing like that much weight. And so I think that definitely leaves a lot more space for positivity to come through as far as it is concerned about that.
Awesome. So Michael and Melissa, kind of being in the industry and working with different organizations across the country, are there some examples of maybe how you've seen that shift or being more inclusive in language or awareness of maybe the language that we have that has taken place in the industry?
Melissa, do you want to?
Melissa, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. Yeah, I think that you're right, Caitlin. There's being in a time where there's like social media and other things, people are getting exposed in lots of different ways. And for example, just a couple weeks ago on our ERG event, we had the Foggy Bottoms Boys on. And for those of you who don't know them, go look them up. But they are very out and proud of who they are as a family, as production agriculture, as of Jewish faith, etc. And like they take a no nonsense approach to the detractors and otherwise, and don't hide a single thing about who they are. And in the conversation with them, they really talked about how they've had a really positive experience in holding leadership positions within the cattle business and etc. And I think that that's a huge shift than what we probably would have had that conversation even just 3 or 4 years ago. And I think that people are recognizing people for their hard work, for what they do and for who they are, and not just who they are with their identity, right? And I think that that's huge. And I think that it continues to be the exposure. Before, when people were isolated in small towns or otherwise, where you just think that you don't know someone. And now having these conversations and seeing the faces and the names in this room, I think that really helps and kind of shifts the conversation. And then I know that, in the work that I do, since I get to sit in the communication space, when we're talking about different language, inclusive language is really important. And so when we work in the dairy space and we work with, we talk about pregnant people versus gendering it, et cetera, I think is really important. I think it's really cool that that's happening because I think that people generally think that agriculture is going to be conservative when we might not take that approach, but it's super critical to the work that we're doing. And I love that we are able to do that and we don't get the pushback from the farmers or others.
Michael, any thoughts there?
Years has been a huge.
Yeah. There you go. Now we can hear you. Might be having a little bit of trouble with connection there, lagging a little bit, Michael, but definitely I'll come back to you and maybe to pass here in a minute. So, Caitlin, kind of back to a couple of thoughts. I had a couple of other questions that I thought, so I maybe start with you as a little follow-up. And before I throw this out there, if anybody in the group has any questions, drop those in the chat or drop a moderator a question. If you'd like to, voice maybe your question or your comments here today. So we'll definitely get that. So as we're walking through, you talked a little bit about, Caitlin, resources, kind of where we're going to and looking online for some of those things. Where are some places that we can look for, information to maybe explore and learn more about LGBTQ people or as an ally, learning about this portion of our community as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so there are a lot of different ways that you can go about finding resources. So I think one of my favorite ways to do is just a simple Google search, but always, of course, with any looking thing on Google, you have to make sure to search its source. So anything that ends in .org or .edu is always a good source to use. I know the Trevor Project has a really good resources on like LGBT and further resources that people can find that are LGBT and that also want to be allies. There are a couple websites out there that are for allies as well. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know there are a couple out there that are for allies as well. different resources. Personally, I'm a research girl, so I like to read like research articles, like actual articles that have been people have conducted research on certain things. So I like to actually read like scientific research that's been conducted on just like the LGBTQ experience. You can find those easily, like I said, on any .edu website. Other resources, I think one of the biggest resources is actually talking to LGBTQ people. And so I think different places where you can find blogs that are from LGBT people, like I know Reddit is a big place where you can find different blogs and different communities of LGBTQ people interacting and sharing their stories and sharing just life and other things. I think that's also a really good resource versus hearing from a secondary source, hearing from the primary source. So I think that's also a really good way. And any other way that you can connect personally with people, like Reddit, Discord, any of the social media apps, I think that's a good resource.
Yeah,
Which
kind of taking
like,
time to hear the perspectives of LGBTQ plus people. I think that's really good. Michael, maybe your connection's back.
Keep my camera off. Does that help at all for?
Yes, I think so. I did there for a second. I think you got back out there. Melissa, kind of a thoughts on kind of resources, you know, as an ally, are there places that you go to learn more or hear some of those perspectives?
Well, that's, I think, where the Cultivating Change Foundation part of my work comes into play. We are try to be consistently be a resource for people, all people who are looking for that. So for example, this month, of course, we're getting a lot of requests to have these kind of conversations across lots of industry, lots of groups and otherwise, but also just building out some resources so that people can find them online. I'll drop our website in the chat and my email and things so you can be in touch with me that way. But I think that that's part of it. And I think that, you know, it's also just like connecting with people across the board. I guess I'm kind of biased because I am pretty plugged in. But the Cultivating Change Foundation is definitely a good place to start. I'd be remiss if I didn't plug that way.
Awesome. We're getting a couple of questions in the chat, so I definitely want to jump over to a couple of those. So one question I had from Anthony, any advice on how to respond to homophobia? Do we engage or not engage? I'll share a little bit of my, I think my response there. It's definitely out there. And what I found is when I engage with maybe homophobia or people out there that have derogatory remarks, a key that I have is like respond with the audience in mind, people who are observing instead of responding or engaging the critic. Because that can often be a messy place to be. There a no-win situation sometimes when you get on Facebook comments or Instagram comments as part of that. And that's a little bit of my approach. Caitlin, Melissa, any advice or experiences that you've had in kind of engaging or not engaging with homophobic remarks?
Let's see. So as far as homophobic remarks, I would say the way to handle those, it depends on the situation. So I think one thing you should definitely take into account is how safe it is, even to respond to the question. Like if I'm outside and it's nighttime and I'm walking, say I'm walking with my girlfriend and there's like a group of guys and they're trying to like catcall us or something, that's probably not the best time to say like, no, like I'm with my girlfriend, like, because that can lead you to experience like personal safety problems. And so in that case, you probably just want to try to ignore. But if I'm having a conversation with someone and they say something that's not necessarily like politically correct or not something that or is can be misconstrued, I would just tell them, you know, gently, of course, and I'd explain to them. Or if I come across like someone who just like genuinely doesn't know, then you know that's totally fine and that's okay to be nice and engage with them in that way. But if it's something that's solely coming from a place of hatred, unfortunately, it's very hard to remedy that because that comes from within you, and there's nothing that I personally could say that would probably change that. It would honestly probably just put me in harm's way. So I'd say the way that you respond is the best way that you can, dependent on the situation and how safe it is for you.
Good advice. Good advice. Melissa?
To build on exactly what Caitlin said, I think the other opportunity is like, if it's something where you're in a large group or in a meeting or a social setting or whatever, it might be that sometimes I'll take a pause and take the person aside, or when there's an opportunity to have a one-on-one with someone, to say, hey, like that comment was out of line, or that comment, was homophobic. Like, let's hit it straight on. A better way to phrase this, or that's not language that we use anymore, and it's unacceptable. And letting people know how it impacts you, given the right circumstances. But it's kind of like it depends on all of this, right? But any chance that you can to make those changes is always welcome.
Not always safer, but can often be safer for an ally to speak up when they see something, to say something.
Yep.
Right? The risk of a personal attack is a little bit less, right?
Yeah.
In being able to do that. Michael, hopefully back online. Thoughts on this and kind of how maybe you interact or engage in or don't engage in some homophobic remarks or situations.
Yeah, and everyone, I'm so sorry for my bandwidth issues today. No, I think Caitlin and Melissa really hit this spot on. I think the first thing that you need to consider is your own personal safety. I was actually at a farm show and had a gentleman make a rather unpleasant comment, and we were kind of talking. He was talking about the prior administration and his dissatisfaction, and said that he thought that Pete Buttigieg would be an excellent candidate for president, but that he wouldn't feel comfortable to vote for Pete. And so I asked him, I said, well, why would you not feel comfortable to vote for Pete Buttigieg if you're agreeing that he's so qualified? And he says, well, you know how they are. And I said, what do you mean by that? He says, well, you know how gay people are, running around with tight pants and pink hair, acting all crazy. I just couldn't vote for Pete Buttigieg. And so if any of you have been to a farm show, you kind of know the attire for a farm show. So I'm certainly presenting diversity incognito. And I looked at him and I said, well, I'm gay. And he looked at me and said, really? Well, I'll be darned. And he walked away. And it was just such a bizarre social interaction. But, I think you've always, and this was a public place. I had colleagues there. So, I wasn't particularly worried for my own personal safety. But, if you do feel safe, if you do feel confident, I encourage everybody, push back on it, challenge that viewpoint. But make sure that you're doing it in a way that is leading with curiosity. If you meet ignorance with aggression or shame or further ignorance, you're not setting a good, fertile environment for there to be any kind of real, lasting, impactful growth.
Yeah, Michael, I've experienced that in bringing a lot of conversations forward. I think just trying to bring visibility and awareness of LGBTQ plus people in our rural communities is a vital first step. Often people don't recognize who's around them, and I think that leads to a little bit of a question that Jim had dropped in, and I think you touched a little bit on this, Caitlin and Michael, of do we have experiences of code switching or hiding this aspect of our lives in order to be part of our communities or to be part of the industry? Michael, good example there. I think of maybe it wasn't immediately visible. Isn't something like wear a name tag and says I'm gay on it, right? But people I think find it they're sometimes caught off guard or surprised, I think, to learn who's around them. Caitlin, can you speak a little bit to that? Have you been in a situation where you've had to hide that aspect of yourself and maybe how did that work out?
Yeah, so I think I kind of always had to hide that aspect of myself, honestly. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I went 4 hours away from college, is so that I could live my life in peace. Because my family is, I don't want to say that they're homophobic, but I will say that they're very religious. And so, there's some differences in ideology there. But yes, I would definitely say that there have been times where I've had to hide who I am. Whether it's been in an academic space or I'm applying for a job, because people, like, whether you know it or not, like, that's still people can still take that into consideration when you're interviewing places. So yeah, I probably wouldn't mention that in a job interview or maybe on an application unless it specifically pertained to that, just to decrease my chances of being profiled because of who I am, of course. Other times, that I've had to hide who I am, maybe now I'm outside versus being inside of the house. It's not that no, they just don't know. But like my mom, I'm at my mom's house. She doesn't know. I haven't told her why, because she's old and they don't usually take kindly to that kind of situation. But she'll probably be fine, honestly. It's fine. But yeah, so I would definitely say that there have been a lot of times where I've had to hide who I am. But at this point in my life, I don't think that's fair to me. I don't think it's fair to the movement. I think everybody should be able to and should want to be able to be whoever they are in any regard. So yeah, there have been times where I've had to hide, but I'm kind of over that. It's the 21st century. You should probably join us.
You know, some good advice that I've had, because I've been in a couple organizations where it wasn't the most comfortable to be visible in my aspects of diversity as a gay man. And some good advice that I've had, whether you're a young professional looking for a job, looking for a career, or maybe you're kind of wondering, is this a good place for me? As you know, if they have an issue for that, you know, with that aspect of diversity, maybe that's a good chance to stop and reflect and be like, is this a good fit for me? Is the organization a good fit for me, or the culture there? And I think that, you know, that is a reality of where we're working in our industry. But I also think that recognizing that and kind of drawing a line of where do our values align and who do we support or speak for, I think is how we reach progress, how we reach greater inclusivity. So some great comments and lots of good questions coming up in the chat, and love this, getting to see a part of this. So let me try to get to the next one that we had coming up from Kate. In regards to language for allies, and Michael, let me toss this one to you, since we lost connection a little bit on a question on this for a little late or a little earlier. For allies or aspiring allies, suggestions on how to participate in conversations. If we're not sure, like, what's the best language to use? I know a lot of people who want to be allies, but they're not sure, or they're afraid of, you know, making a mistake or saying the wrong thing. Anything from your perspective on how we can give advice to allies in navigating those waters?
Yeah, I would kind of go back to, I would encourage everyone here, lead with curiosity. Make sure that you are doing this of a place of growth and of betterment. Certainly, you know, I wouldn't, don't pull aside your token gay colleague and ask him in a all staff meeting how you can be a better ally. That's probably not going to feel very good. But if you can build that kind of a relationship, that kind of friendship, and it's rooted in trust and compassion, ask that individual aside and say, hey, would you be interested to kind of work with me on this? I really am committed to this, and this is important to me because X, Y, and Z. How can I do better? Or how can I better uplift you? How can I better uplift this community? And I think that's kind of a good way to do it. You know, I think a mistake that I frequently see, and I know that it's in good fun. I know it's in a place of love, but I think a lot of us have witnessed, you know, if somebody knows and they want to kind of signal that they're an ally, you know, very quickly we'll see people, and it can often be straight women, say, oh my gosh, I love Drag Race, I love drag queens, I love drag, and they really lay it on thick. And it, to the point, it kind of feels performative, and I understand that you were trying to find middle ground with me, but understand that, you know, not every gay man is a drag queen, and not every gay man watches drag at all. And that's okay, right? There's room for everybody here. But I think there's a lot of other ways that from a human to human that we can kind of connect and find shared middle ground to build these relationships and signal our support of each other as humans.
I hear you. Sometimes it can be a little intimidating, like when you go overboard on like, hey, look at, hey, I'm here.
Yeah.
We hear the subtle mentions and references, right? I think those notes are picked up on and good. I think one of the conversations I've had is like, hey, if you want it to be, let it be known that you're an ally, or drop those clues. I think there's little small visible, ways that you can do that. And having a pride pin that you wear, on occasion, or having something on your desk that represents pride or allyship. I think that can be a good way to, non-verbally, but let it be known that you got there. Caitlin, any experiences or advice that you would have here?
Yeah, I would say I love what Michael said about the people always being like, oh yeah, I love drag, I watch drag, all of this and that. But I do feel like a lot of times people are only comfortable with like LGBTQ when it can be commodified. And like now, if I can't be like, if my culture, who I am, can't be bought and sold for your attention, and now I want to say like becomes, since it's not, but no, let me rephrase. Since it's commodified, as in it's bought and sold, when it can no longer be bought and sold, the value, people deem it, lowers. And I think that also has a lot to do with the kind of culture that we're in now. Like if you can't make what is it? If it can't be something that can be consumed, then what is it? And so I think that's a big thing as well, within the LGBTQ community, constantly being commodified. And I don't really know how to explain that to someone that is not in that position, but I see it all the time. I see it all the time with especially like the drag races and everything. And just, I want to say, just being a person. I don't know how to explain it. I'm so sorry, but yeah, it's, if anybody in and can explain it better than I can, please do. But there definitely is a commodifization of the LGBT.
No, I think we see that in criticisms like in June, Pride Month, people fly a flag, a rainbow flag, right?
The
And then
company
suddenly June 1, Monday, they disappear.
right.
So how are we having that allyship and support throughout the year? I think is part of that.
Right, and it's performative, and it's like not true allyship because you don't feel like this the other 11 months out of the year. And yeah, that's definitely what I mean by it's a commodity. Well, it can be seen as a commodity, something to be bought and sold by people that are not in the community, for sure.
Right. So Melissa, as an ally here, do you have advice, or how do you navigate conversations? Maybe you have other people come to you and asking, how do I be an ally? How do I navigate those conversations, or where do I start?
I think the most important piece of advice I have is that it's okay to get it wrong, and that we're all learning and we're all on this journey together. And so sometimes we're all human. That's the first message, right? We're all human. But secondly, like when you're working in this space, we're all doing work, and it is work, and it is making a conscious effort everywhere. And there's a time where you might use a phrase or make a reference, especially with, pronouns, for example, is a difficult thing that you have to consciously think about sometimes, and you don't always get it right. And I think it's okay with taking the feedback too, right? Like as Michael said, if somebody comes back to you and says, that struck me the wrong way, or this wasn't exactly, or this made me feel in a kind of way, instead of getting defensive about it, taking that feedback and growing from it. It's the only way that we can continue to learn. Just as being an ally is helping to point people in the right direction in that way, it's also kind of accepting that you're on that journey, also learning. And we've all done it, we've all been there, and we will continue to do so.
I agree with that. Michael, I want to jump to you, back to you. At the beginning, we were talking a little bit about your involvement in research and trying to pull out some of those metrics. It can be hard to find, definitive like information on LGBTQ plus people in agriculture. Part of that is, you have to, express that aspect of your diversity or step up and be vocal in that. Can you speak to a little bit more like where can we find some resources for deeper understanding and information? And I think Emily asked a question in the chat, kind of like, what are we looking for from organizations in trying to move forward or build resources in this space?
Yeah, I'll maybe take the second part of that first. I think, you know, as organizations want to do better, I think that that's huge. But make sure that you are seeking a diverse audience of peers, of colleagues that are helping you kind of craft and cultivate these resources. You know, and that's really what it takes for this to become something tangible and something that holds value. You know, make this an opportunity for your organization to kind of come together and share perspective, share input, and that's kind of where you can strengthen this. The last thing that you want to do as an organization is kind of come out with I don't know, this kind of lump sum of resources that you think are going to be helpful, and then realize that this doesn't serve anybody, and you're, if anything, not only will this then fall on deaf ears, you're certainly likely to kind of jeopardize the overall reputation of your organization. People might then immediately feel that your organization is performative, and the moment that activism is not authentic, it is performance based, and that is very, very important for us all to think about. You know, if you are looking to find you know, other members of the community that could be helpful in this, I would encourage you to get involved in cultivating change. Get involved, especially for student leaders on the call. Get involved with AFA. I think the work that cultivating change, the work that AFA, get involved with Ryan and Pride in Agriculture. There are so many ways that individuals inside of the agriculture industry are working to kind of be bridge builders and connect us together. There's a lot of power in numbers, and when our voices are unified, we have much more strength together. And at the end of the day, we all have a lot more in common than we do that divides us.
Caitlin, Melissa, thoughts to follow up on that? No. Caitlin, go ahead.
Oh, could you repeat the question, please?
You know, follow up on that and kind of Michael's thoughts. I think one kind of aspect where I was going for that is following up with, like, okay, as maybe younger professional, kind of work, you know, from college students or moving into young professionals, is there something that you look for in companies or organizations as potential employers or future employers, or organizations that you want to align yourself with?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, when I look into a company and I am trying to figure out if I wanted to align myself with them or not, I look into, of course, like their mission. What is your mission? What are your values? What steps have you taken towards actually achieving those goals? What does that look like? What does your culture look like? The office culture, that's very important to a job. What does that look like? What are your policies protecting individuals like LGBTQ individuals? What are your policies surrounding that? What are your HR sort of protocols surrounding anything that could happen to you as it pertains to being LGBTQ? Of course, I look at that. Maybe if I'm interviewing, I'd ask the interviewer, have they ever had any issues surrounding that? If they did, how did they handle it? Or if it's never happened, if it does happen, like, then what are your steps? What steps do you take to prevent that from happening? And what steps do you take now that that has happened? I think that's pretty much the only thing that you can do before you accept the position to know if it'll be good for you or not.
Yeah, some good questions to consider, and a good spot to ask questions, like during that interview process and learning a little bit about the culture of the organization. And I think that takes us to Melissa. You had mentioned you have a hand in building the ERG, you know, at DMI, and kind of getting that started. A lot of us that are involved in ag organizations in the industry don't have an ERG or that support system in the workplace. Can you speak to a little bit of, like, what does it take to get that started, or where can we turn to try to figure that out?
Yeah, so and I'm happy to connect with any of you offline because this is probably a longer conversation than we have time. But nonetheless, I think that, you know, first of all, you start with HR if you're fortunate enough to have HR. Right? Like I come from a lot of smaller organizations where HR was our accounting person, and basically they were paying our benefits, and that was the extent of it. I'm fortunate that I work at an organization that does have HR that was supportive and already kind of had it in the works. But I think that it's, it's, even if it's getting a group of people together that have the idea, even if it is unofficial, right? Having a safe group of folks to meet with and have those conversations and find common ground. But, if you are fortunate enough to work in those spaces, I think it's starting with those conversations with HR, find others that will support you, and start having some conversations about what does it look like and what is your mission and what are you setting out to do. That was some of the initial conversations that we had. And part of it was a safe place for people in the community to come to find support and have other people who are like them within the workplace. And secondarily is things like this, the opportunity to learn from each other and bring in allies to be able to be supportive in the workplace so that everybody can show up as who they are, whatever that means. And then if you don't have that, right, you work remote, you work on your own, you work in a plant, a manufacturing facility, on a farm, or otherwise, look for these other organizations that we've all kind of rattled off that I see in the chat. We're going to be sending a lot of links out after this webinar, but Cultivating Change, AFA, Pride in Agriculture, there are groups out there that can also serve in that same way. For example, at Cultivating Change, we also have some affinity groups that are meeting beyond our annual summit event. We have an annual summit coming up in October where we bring together folks. It's a great way to connect with people, but then we connect throughout the year as kind of like ERGs for folks and those who are working in the education space, the nonprofit space, in the industry, et cetera. So I would say just make those connections, but happy to connect with otherwise folks on the nitty-gritty of the ERG work. And I see there are other people on here that are parts of other ERGs and other companies too, that I'm happy to also connect some dots, because there are a lot of them out there, and they're continuing to build and grow on their journeys.
There you go. I think that's really good and really powerful. As part of that, so brings us to our last 5 minutes, and I definitely want to do another round robin and hear from each of you. Kind of a question, and I think Kirby asked it good here. Like, what brings you joy in this topic today? What brings you conversation? Like, what are you seeing that's positive in this space, and in creating more inclusive spaces in agriculture for LGBTQ plus people? And close out, where can we find you online? So, Michael, you want to get started?
Yeah, Kirby, I love your question. What really brings me so much joy in this is it is just my deepest hope that this kind of work helps somebody. If today's conversation helps one person become a better ally, helps one person become a more inclusive leader, helps change the mind of one person who maybe has some negative sentiments about LGBTQIA plus people, it would mean the world to me, right? I can say, and Melissa called this out earlier, I mean, today is the 9-year anniversary of marriage equality. I mean, same-sex couples have not legally been able to get married in the state nationally for a decade yet. That's wild. Look how far this community has come. Look how far as a society we have come, and look at all the love that this creates. And I think, rooted in love is community, and the stronger that we all are, and going back to continuing to lead with curiosity and realizing that we have so much more that unifies us as a people, as a country, as a human race than we do than the things that divide us. I think that is just my greatest hope for all of us today. So I'd love to keep the conversation going. You can find me on all social media platforms. Connect with me on LinkedIn, find me on Facebook. Would love to connect.
Thanks, Melissa.
Sorry. It's all of the things that Michael just said, right? He got to go first, so he got lucky. But it's just We have so much other work to be done. We're all in this ag space because we deeply care about it, right? And so what brings me joy is that there is like an intersection here, and to see more and more people who are in production agriculture coming out and living who they are, feeling confident to return to the farm because we need farmers. We will always need farmers, and for people to be able to return to their hometowns and to return to small towns and to be able to do that is important. And finding the joy, finding the commonalities is just so great because, you know, we do what we do because we have the joy for it. And I just love being able to have these conversations, and to see the number of people who show up to also talk about it is pretty incredible.
And where can we find you online?
Oh, sorry. I'll drop my email in the chat, and you can find me across social media. Add me on LinkedIn. Just remember, my first name only has one S. Sometimes that throws people off.
Autocorrect will get me on that one. Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. Caitlin.
Yeah, so I think my biggest hope is that agriculture keeps moving forward in the way that it has. I love that we were able to all come together today to do a webinar on LGBTQ during the Pride Month and everything like that. So personally, my hope is that agriculture just keeps moving forward. I know that what you were saying before, a lot of LGBT people, they're leaving the agriculture sector, they're leaving the rural areas because of the way they're perceived and the way they're treated. So I hope that open conversations like this and people being able to take this newfound knowledge back to where they are, it helps to garner a lot more LGBT back into the agriculture space, because I know there are a lot of people that want to be farmers, they want to be agriculturalists, they want to be involved, but simply because of like the culture surrounding agriculture sometimes is not exactly accepting of minorities, like, you know, like LGBTQ. It definitely is a hindrance. So honestly, I just hope that like agriculture, it keeps getting more accepting, and we just keep all expanding our minds. And I honestly think we're in a good position for that and to keep moving forward. So yeah, you can find me on any of the socials, just Caitlin Davis. I'll drop my email in the chat if there's anything that you want to collaborate on or talk to me further about. And I just want to thank everybody for showing up today, for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. Appreciate that. And for myself, you know, I see more and more examples and opportunities of, you know, inclusion happening. And then as much as, you know, I want to do a lot of work in elevating LGBTQ plus voices and perspectives in the community. But something I see really exciting and powerful is, you know, knowing our climate today and our culture, trying to empower people to be allies and empowering them to speak up and make that space where LGBTQ people may not feel safe doing so. And I think that's really powerful. And you can find me online as Beef Runner, anywhere on social media. And I encourage you to check out the community and resources at prideandagriculture.com. Definitely kind of a resource, not only in professional space, but really trying to support farmers and ranchers in our industry as well. So today, I think we've had a lot of great examples of conversation, a lot of great and inspiring thoughts that we've shared. I think a lot of that, something that really spoke out, you know, as far as allyship, Melissa, you put it well, as being the voice for those who aren't in the room, and being able to do that and being willing to, and having the courage to speak up. Caitlin, you brought up, you know, I think we're seeing a lot of work in improvements with the next generation, being more powerful and like addressing stigmas, paying attention to language as part of that. And Michael bringing up, I think, examples of how we can be more inclusive. I think how can we create more space? And I think your Gregory source and kind of acquaintance and familiarity with some of the, you know, some of the numbers that are out there, and how can we elevate LGBTQ voices and have representation there, and having an acknowledgement that like where can we create those inclusive spaces in our industry as part of that. So definitely thank everyone for being here, and I'll turn it over to Nicole and with AFA for close us out and take us home.
Thank you so much. On behalf of AFA, I just want to say a huge thank you to our panelists and everyone who is here. I know I learned a ton listening to you, and this gives me so much hope and joy and optimism for the future of agriculture and the diversity of thought and ideas that we will have at the table, and the type of inclusive industry that we're building. Caitlin, I think I heard you say that your voice is your biggest tool. And so I think that is my takeaway from today. And I hope that everyone goes out, leaves this webinar and goes and uses their voice as their tool to help lift others up. And hopefully here at AFA, we're all about building bridges. So hopefully there were some connections made. We will follow up with an email with all of these resources. So be on the lookout for that. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Have a great Wednesday and happy Pride.
Goodbye. Thank you.